Hi, everybody. Tom Woods here. Very pleased to be talking to Vox Day here on the show. Hard to categorize Vox Day because he does so darn many things. We're going to be talking in particular today about his book, SJWs Always Lie, Taking Down the Thought Police. SJW, of course, is an acronym for Social Justice Warrior. I know most of you know that, but not all of you. Vox is the publisher of the popular Vox Populi blog. You can find that at Vox Day. That's VOXDAY.blogspot.com. He's also the author of the book Return of the Great Depression. He's written on economics, conservatism, on progressivism, on the social justice warrior phenomenon. He's a novelist. He's accomplished in science fiction and fantasy. He's also a computer game designer. Vox, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Tom. It's always good to talk to you.
First of all, I don't like the term social justice warrior because it actually makes them sound sort of respectable, that they believe in something and they're going to be warriors for it. I don't like that. I want to make them sound completely disreputable. But I use the term because everybody uses it, but it wouldn't have been my preference. I would have chosen something far more derogatory.
The thing is that the more derogatory term is a less effective, a less rhetorically effective term because they don't feel that it applies to them. You know, the SJW does not feel that he's a whiner. And so what affects them, the reason that the term is so effective is that when they hear people using the term with contempt dripping off their chin and they identify with the term, that's when the maximum emotional effect takes place. What's happened is that regardless of the meaning of the term, the essence is so rejected that the term has become negative. It's much in the same way that, you know, the way that blacks or previously African Americans, previously Afro-Americans, previously Negroes are constantly changing what term is offensive or not offensive. It's because the core problem is that they don't like being identified as a separate racial identity. It doesn't matter what the term is. Over time, the perception of the term is colored by its meaning. And that's what's happened with SJW.
What are the ideological preconceptions that these people hold?
Well, their core ideology has its roots in John Stuart Mill. Essentially, their core ideology revolves around tolerance, equality, progress, inclusion, diversity. The acronym actually worked out TEPID. And so those 5 elements are their core ideology. But what's important to understand is that what they mean by tolerance is not necessarily what the dictionary defines as tolerance. What they mean by diversity is not what the dictionary defines as diversity. It is their highly refined definition of those things where their tolerance is actually highly intolerant. Their diversity is absolutely non-diverse when it comes to intellectual opinions and so forth. But that TEPID acronym essentially describes their core ideology. If you scratch an SJW, going to find something related to those things. However, it's important to remember that their ideology is fundamentally dynamic. It is constantly changing. It's what we talk about when we say the SJW narrative. The best way to think about SJWs is like a school of fish. They're all moving together in sync, and then suddenly they all shift, to the right or to the left or up or down. And they're all very aware of what the others are doing and thinking so that they can move in time with that. Because the one thing that terrifies the SJW more than anything else is to turn right when all the other SJWs turn left. Suddenly he's out of sync with the narrative, and they will turn on him and attack him just as mercilessly as they would attack a non-SJW.
Give me an example of somebody who ran afoul of the SJWs and not only ran afoul of them, but then responded in precisely the wrong way. And what was the outcome?
Well, one of the examples from the book is Sir Tim Hunt. He is not an SJW, but he's also no arch conservative or anything. He's not very political at all. He's a Nobel laureate, a man of great accomplishment, and he was giving a speech in Korea, and he just happened to make a minor joke about women in the laboratory. And this is a guy who, it came out, has actually been very supportive of women in science. In fact, he was speaking at a conference that was related to women in science. And what happened was that he was sandbagged by an SJW who falsely characterized and exaggerated some of the comments that he made to make him look like this outrageous sexist who didn't think that women should be allowed in the laboratory. And because he was traveling from Korea, he had no chance to respond to it. And by the time he had landed, SJWs at his academic institution had already put pressure on his wife And she ended up encouraging him to resign, thinking that they had a deal where he would just resign and the whole thing would be kept quiet. And then, of course, the SJWs always need to parade their scalps and show off their trophies. So the institution promptly announced that it had caused him to resign, and he ended up getting kicked off of several honorary seats and so forth. And it was really sad because the guy and his wife clearly had no idea that they were going to be the target of a global media campaign, and he was completely unready for it.
Most normal people think if I apologize, these people will be happy. It has nothing to do with him as an individual. What it has to do with, as you say in your book, is making an example of him so as to terrify everybody else. When I criticize any private institution, I get told, they have the right to do that. Yeah, I get that. I get that a place can hire and fire as they wish. That's not the point. I can still criticize them, but yet let's try and take that objection seriously. Why should a libertarian, and I know you wouldn't describe yourself as a libertarian, but my audience is, why should a libertarian care about this if really all we're dealing with is a bunch of private employers who have the right to be pig-headed and oppressive if they want to?
Well, first of all, I would point out that the statement is false, not only in the USA, but in the rest of the world. Employers no longer have the right to hire and fire whoever they want. I mean, it's fine and dandy to talk about how in your imaginary ideal intellectual world, everybody's got that right. But in the actual world we inhabit, in the legal systems we actually live in, that's simply not true. Corporations have certain rules that they have to abide by, and some of the things that are protected are related to the individual's speech rights. So the employer doesn't necessarily have the right to do that. But more importantly, the reason it matters is because the whole program of social pressure has been one way. For example, you even see people trying to argue that Twitter had the right to kick Milo Yiannopoulos off of Twitter because they didn't like what he was saying, because it's a private institution. And yet, these are the very same people who are applauding the fact that a Christian bakery was fined hundreds of thousands of dollars and is being forced to bake a wedding cake for a homosexual couple. And then there's another case with a floral studio, I believe. And so it's not correct to pretend that we're living in a society or a legal framework where everyone is treated equally. And so given where we are, given the fact that we are caught up in a very vicious cultural war that has really only been fought by one side for the past 20 to 30 years, it's not appropriate to pretend that that cultural war does not exist.
You mentioned Milo. I posted a number of tweets relating to his ousting from Twitter, and I was responding to people who were especially hysterical about this, saying that people like Milo, this was a black woman, she's saying he's trying to keep black women off the internet. So I responded and said, and yet, funny thing is, no black women have actually been driven from the internet, and yet Milo was driven from Twitter. You don't think there's maybe a little hysteria going on here that we might want to ratchet down? I think the reason they respond to him the way they do is not just for his provocative style. It's for what he represents. He doesn't just answer them. He causes them to be objects of laughter and ridicule, which is something they don't know how to cope with because these are the people with the least sense of humor of anyone who ever lived, as far as I can see.
Well, it's more than that. The reason that Milo's a target, the reason that I'm a target, the reason that you're a target is because all of us have at various points in time stood up to the cultural left. Every time somebody stands up to them, 10 other people realize that it's possible. One of their goals is to instill a state of fear so that people muzzle themselves, so that they don't even have to be muzzled by the SJWs, so that no one is speaking any of the crime think that might be taking place. And so the more that people see people like Milo running amok, the more that they see me standing up and saying things that are deemed unacceptable, the more that you're talking about things that the left does not approve of or want people to hear, the more people realize they can speak up too. That's really what's driving their campaign against Milo. That's why he was kicked off Instagram, even though he didn't do anything on Instagram. That's why I was kicked off Goodreads. Eventually, we're going to be introducing a whole number of alternative social media structures simply because they cannot permit the outspoken and fearless right to even be present on their social media because we are much more convincing than they are.
I have people I talk about on the show who, let's say, disagree with me on some aspect of economic policy. So what we normal people think is, well, maybe someday we could sit down and try and hash that out. And I think a lot of people who are naive and not really aware of what we're dealing with here think that the SJWs are the same way. They're just a little bit outspoken. But if we could all just sit down with them, maybe we might get somewhere. What's wrong with that?
Well, that's fundamentally the moderate perspective. And to be honest, I have a lot of contempt for moderates because they like nothing better than shooting at their own side. A lot of the people who feel comfortable criticizing you have probably never said boo to anyone on the left. And so the moderate loves to engage in criticism and backseat driving, and he's always happiest shooting at his own side. I'm not sure that you can convince a lot of those people otherwise because they're really being driven by their split the difference personalities more than the idea that they can actually convince the SJWs or anything. I think deep down, most of those people know very well that the SJWs can't be convinced. I think that they want to talk you into playing nice with the idea that maybe we can all pretend that this cultural war is not taking place.
What are the various steps that we can expect to see in an SJW campaign against an individual or an institution?
If you go to my blog at Vox Populi, there is a free SJW Attack guide.
Okay.
It's actually in 5 different languages. There's 8 stages of an SJW attack sequence. The first one is to locate or create a violation of the narrative. And remember, the narrative is always shifting, so it's very easy for them to create a violation of it. Number 2 is point and shriek. Number 3 is isolate and swarm. They're always intent on cutting off their target from any emotional support that might be offered. That's why it's so important whenever you see somebody being attacked by SJWs to immediately get in contact with them and offer support and make sure they understand that they're not alone. The 4th stage is reject and transform. And what that refers to is the apology. If you apologize, then they'll transform your apology into proof of your guilt. Why would you be apologizing if you weren't guilty of the crime? The 5th stage is press for surrender. The 6th stage is appeal to amenable authority. The 7th stage is the show trial. And then finally is the victory parade, where they parade the head of their target around and point out to all the other SJWs what they did.
Suppose you are the victim of this. Let's just say you're the average person, you're working for some corporation, and you tweeted something out, somebody reported you to your boss. Let's say it's something like that. So you really aren't expecting to be made a target,
right.
And you get that terrifying call into the office and close the door and sit down. We have something important to talk about. How should you take things from there?
You know, in that SJW Attack guide, which again I point out is free, the very first thing to do is to rely on the 3 R's. Recognize that it's happening, remain calm, and realize that no one cares. You know, it's very important for people to understand that other people don't really care about what's happening to you. Your really close friends might, your family might, but even they kind of figure, this wouldn't be happening if you didn't have it coming. And so the immediate instinct for most people is to plead their innocence and then run around telling everybody and their brother about what's happening to them. But that does no good whatsoever. In fact, it actually makes things worse. You don't try to reason with them. The instinctive reaction when somebody accuses you of having said something that was sexist or having done something that was racist, their first instinct is to try to deny it and explain it away. But that's missing the point. That's taking their accusation at face value. They're not accusing you because you did something and they're upset about it. They're going after you because you're a target, and this is just their weapon. This is just their tactic. It's like trying to argue with a machine gun or a sword. Don't try to reason with them. And above all, the single most important thing is do not apologize. If you apologize...
cannot emphasize this enough.
If you apologize, it is interpreted as a confession. If you can imagine, the police bring you in and they accuse you of murder. And you apologize, well, they will view that as a confession, pronounce you guilty, and move right to the punishment stage. And so a normal person thinks, even if I didn't do anything wrong, I'm sorry that you're upset. So I'm going to apologize so that you won't be upset. But what they're doing is they're signing their confession of guilt to something that they didn't do. And so that's why it's very important never to apologize to SJWs. We're going to be introducing an alternative Twitter, an alternative Wikipedia, all kinds of stuff. There's a lot of stuff going on that people don't know about yet, and it's going to be very important for people like you to let them know about it and let them know why it's important to do these things rather than allow yourself to be subjected to SJWs like Zuckerberg and Jack, whatever his name is at Twitter. Right now, the SJWs have the social media high ground, but we're going to take it away from them. voxday.blogspot.com.
Social justice, 1, 2, 3. I wanna be PC. It's just the way to be for me and you.